Greater Buffalo program, our 478th Imagine Greater Buffalo program, and a milestone, our 100th virtual Imagine lecture hosted by our Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thank you for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, before we get started, a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, you can type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and their YouTube channel, and we hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker, Michael J. Finn. Michael Finn is the Executive Director of the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council, or its acronym, GBNRTC. Michael was previously the Commissioner of Buffalo's Department of Public Works, Parks, and Streets, and today he will be discussing updates on the regional central process, which includes reimagining the Scajaquada Parkway as part of the Olmsted Corridor and Park system. We're fortunate to have the recently retired Executive Director of the GBNRTC with us today, Hal Morris. So welcome to both of you, Michael and Hal, and take it away.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a really exciting initiative that we at GBNRTC are involved with and leading forward. As Dennis mentioned, I've just started recently, but I've had some certain experience with this project in my prior role. And for those not familiar, the 198 Scajaquada corridor has been studied pretty much for my whole career. And I think this initiative that Hal has been leading and it is continuing to take a different approach to looking at the totality of the transportation system in the region central area, and also how it can impact or even improve things that are other than transportation, like quality of life, economic development, and a lot of things that we've learned that the transportation system can do throughout COVID, when there was a lot less use of it by cars and more use by other things like restaurants. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hal to give our update.
Yes, thank you and good afternoon. I would like to offer some visuals here on our PowerPoint in terms of how we're talking about Region Central, and I want to explain what Region Central means and how we're using that corridor in this project to create vibrant and healthy communities. We, of course, as mentioned, are the GBNRTC. We have 7 members and have been here for about 50 years. So what we do is we work together in a cooperative association to plan for transportation, prioritize funding for transportation, and see projects through from the conceptual to the development and to the implementation phase. So we have had this Region Central project. We've taken it on since 2018 when the former process was stalled, and we were asked to take it on and see if we could build a consensus response from the communities to what we could do in Region Central. And the first thing we thought was, how do we create a sense of place?
In the Buffalo Niagara region, there is a place we call a Region Central.
We built this place.
And it's home to about 84,000 people, about a third of Buffalo's residents. Buffalo neighborhoods in Region Central include Black Rock, Delavan Grider, Elmwood Bidwell, Fillmore Leroy, Grant Amherst, Hamlin Park, Maston Park, Parkside, and Upper West Side. Region Central also has numerous educational and cultural institutions, and also incredible natural features such as Scajaquada Creek, Point Lake, and the Olmsted Parks and Parkway system. Over the past decade, our region has been finding a new identity in the 21st century. Innovative developments highlight this resurgence, such as Startup New York, Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, Buffalo High Technology Manufacturing Complex, and the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering. Environmental improvements, for example, the transformation of the Buffalo River, have highlighted success stories. A renewed sense of possibility is shown in the recent population growth in our region. Region Central is a key part of this resurgence, serving as a major educational hub, a growing area of commerce, and a tourist destination. It should be noted that much is happening in Region Central already. The educational complex is transforming to meet the needs of future generation students, as seen at Buffalo State College, Canisius College, and Medaille. The world-class park system and cultural institutions also have plans and major projects emerging in Olmsted Parks, Albright Knox Gudlich, and Birchfield Art Museums, the Buffalo Zoo, Buffalo Historical Museum, Richard Complex, and numerous others. Major plans to improve and renew Scajaquada Creek, the green spine of Region Central with linkage to Niagara River, are progressing. Neighborhoods are active in planning for their community. Black Rock has plans for a renewed harbor area and significant community development proposals. The Grand Amherst area, Hamlin Park, and many others are active, and these initiatives fit within overall Region Central planning. Our studies have shown the need to strengthen affordable housing for people to live in these neighborhoods. Transportation and mobility initiatives are needed to provide access to these incredible features for residents of Region Central, as well as people coming to the area for work, visit, and other opportunities. Finally, Region Central, while strong in itself, impacts nearby areas such as downtown Buffalo, first-ring suburbs, and other parts of Buffalo Niagara, such as Niagara Falls. Within Region Central, the neighborhoods are all very diverse, have their own unique identity, and are all unified due to their geographical closeness. They are all interconnected and rise or fall together when it comes to mobility. Part of this Region Central plan is assessing how people move, not just through, but around these neighborhoods that make up Region Central. So what is happening with transportation? Over the past 2 decades, efforts to address transportation and access needs in Region Central have focused on the Scajaquada Expressway, Route 198. This Region Central effort is a new starting point to holistically understand how we strengthen all the communities in the heart of Buffalo Niagara to create a safe, healthy, and equitable region for all. The initiative is focusing on what makes Region Central a great place to live, work, study, enjoy parks, and the wonderful institutions that are found in Region Central. How can we support the emerging optimism and renewal of Region Central and their surrounding areas of Buffalo Niagara? Region Central planning is a very different approach that is impartial, methodical, and fact-based with next-generation technical analysis. We also brought in community and stakeholder collaboration, input, and participation to determine some potential projects for Region Central. This is part of a continuing regional planning process for project development in the Scajaquada corridor and recognizes studies on Humboldt Parkway and Kensington Expressway. We understand that transportation improvements in the area are key, as connecting people to jobs, medical facilities, shopping, recreation, friends, relatives bring life and vitality to the area. Work underway now helps us understand what kind of transportation we need currently and in the future to make this happen. Information collected in the Region Central planning process has helped us to provide a better path to plan for the future. While we have a good understanding of today's travel, our planning looks to provide answers that will last for decades and serve our future generations. Also, in the next several years, we will find ourselves traveling differently in increasingly more automated vehicles, new forms of public transportation, and new types of personal mobility. Improved roads and streets with new kinds of traffic signals will reduce traffic congestion. We also will have different travel needs, as seen recently, such as more work from home, online shopping, and remote medical visits. We are looking carefully at these futures to be sure that transportation improvements consider these and provide people with better transportation and more cost-effective infrastructure.
So that's just a brief 5 minutes of what the mission is here and why we're looking at this a little differently. It's not a traditional traffic study, but it looks at Region Central as a whole, how it interacts, how the neighborhoods work together, and how they're impacted by transportation and mobility today as well in the coming decades. So how can we leverage that and those projects to make all these things happen that we talked about? We started from one region forward, and if you're familiar with our organization, we worked together to build a forward-looking approach to transportation, land use, and development in Western New York. And that fed into our Moving Forward 2050, a new way to plan for transportation, to talk about the need for transportation, the types of improvements we need, not only in the current context, but in the future, and also in terms of the types of mobility initiatives that will be there to help guide our transportation transformation. So we talked about the previous studies that was underway since the early 2000s, and there's about $100 million that was on the table to do that. The study stopped in 2018, and the governor asked us to pick that up and look for some fresh thinking to expand some options for the Scajaquada. So our new approach looked at how we would reimagine the future of that central portion of the Buffalo Niagara region and use a different approach. So we're really grounded in community values and ideas, which included not just a couple of public meetings, but continuous outreach and engagement, future states for the corridor, land uses and features, what's happening in terms of transportation assets, trip patterns, and travel needs. So we can look in previously in terms of some traffic volumes, but we want to look at what it really means. What does the Scajaquada Expressway really do? And how can we look at a future in terms of satisfying the needs of mobility for the communities, as well as leveraging that to build stronger assets? Historically, we know about Frederick Law Olmsted, how we created the Parks and Parkways system for the best planned city in America, if not the world. So while that's had some challenges over the last few decades, right now hundreds of millions of dollars are invested or being invested towards many of the current assets. So the historic, cultural, significant redeveloping First Community, Black Rock, and other neighborhoods were evident, as shown in the video. In the Delaware Park area, a major homestead park with nearly 350 acres plays a central role in this park system and the city itself. So the educational complex is there, the significant water features, which nourish us in terms of the resources that are available, as well as our environmental and cultural resources that includes Scajaquada Creek, Point Lake, and the Niagara River. Plus, not only the expressway itself, but strong perpendicular corridors. Elmwood is strong, Delaware Avenue is strong, adjacent corridors gaining strength, including Niagara Street, that project nearing completion with great results, and emerging Main Street and Grant Street corridors. So how do we bring that all together? The first thing we wanted to do was to help identify the neighborhoods and help convince people that other people live there and it's a real community that works together. So we look through, again, going from the Niagara River all the way through to the eastern terminus of this project, and look at how it's building a sense of place with public recognition of its importance and why it's really important to work together. So previous studies really looked at the expressway itself from Grant Street to Parkside. During that study process, many questions and concerns came up about how do you interface with Main Street? How do you interface going east? How do you interface with the 190? So we expanded our study area to include a much larger area that is impacted and these neighborhoods that work together. So as shown in the video, these are our neighborhoods that we're looking at now, plus how they also interact with other areas and neighborhoods outside of Region Central. An important component was looking at inclusive economic development and affordable housing. We mentioned that. So we've been using a strong economist that has helped us work through what's there in terms of land use. How can that be nourished with better mobility, create jobs that can really strengthen our region as well as those neighborhoods. Same with health equity. If we look at access and mobility to health facilities and better mobility and access, healthy outcomes by ability to then have people do more active transportation modes, this can really be strengthened in terms of what our overall approach to doing this is. Parks and parkways. So we recognize the importance of it, things that have been contaminated, impaired, limited views, access, utilization that had been much stronger in the past, looking at generations of physical alternations, the transportation infrastructure that is over and adjacent to the creek, things that we look at now in terms of how can we change that and strengthen it going forward. Cultural, so we talked about the world-class cultural crescent and How do we then improve mobility so that we can have our people in our region in the immediate neighborhoods access these valuable opportunities, as well as not only local, but as well as greater part of the region and really worldwide. So the things we envisioned: inclusive economic development, expands opportunity equitably across the community, restoration, preservation of natural waterways, neighborhoods strong, again, aspirations for the full spectrum of our community, and recapturing Olmsted's legacy. So it sounds different from a traditional transportation planning and transit study. So we set out to look at the context. What were the forces of change, history, previous plans? Working with the community, identified priorities and goals in terms of engagement, livability, connectivity, successful neighborhoods, what that means. And then our mission is develop a mobility plan for the corridor, the local street network, bike ped connections, transit service, shared mobility, and mobility innovations, excuse me. A lot of community input, needs and goals in the neighborhood, issues and opportunities, ideas for restoration or renewal of our waterways. Many of these were already in plans that we were able to cultivate and bring into our process, and as well as plans for growth and development of area educational and cultural institutions. Some of the challenge was when you look at Scajaquada, and most of the people I talk to never experienced this part of the region without the expressway there. So we had to build an understanding of the balance between the expressway's importance as a regional connection, as well as the how it impacts things like isolated neighborhoods and ability to connect with the rest of the transportation system. To plan for mobility, connections for all throughout Region Central, access for all to Greater Buffalo, and accommodations for all that includes not only drive alone, but other modes of transportation too. We recognized and wanted to explain that future traffic likely different from the past. Transportation demand management, there's an active program now on travel behavior. So we looked at things like the Green Code, Go Buffalo Niagara. Some of those are in place now and actively changing the way we move about and access our jobs and other features. Also, the possible permanent shift among our workforce in terms of teleworking, working from home. Also, workforce types will likely be eligible and affected, new flexibility and cost, and also the effects of autonomous and connected vehicles on trip making and patterns. It sounds futuristic, but many of those things are in the works and likely to be appearing soon. It will have a different impact on how we move around. Some of these things you saw in the video, but they're worthy of mention. 35% of daily trips in Region Central are made by walking. 2/3 are driving trips less than 5 miles. Some of those then could be easily convertible to biking, walking, shared mobility trips, including transit, scooters, and other on-demand ride sourcing. The vast majority of working trips begin in Region Central are less than a mile. So the importance of investment in local ped infrastructure and connections is really critical. Experience on the Scajaquada corridor itself, the expressway. We looked at the mobility experience for people using and crossing the expressway, including only 18% of the expressway trips are for work. We always used to think that it was a commuter facility, but it's not so much. 71% of the trips already are occurring on roads other than the expressway. So if you're on the expressway, there's a good chance you spent a fair amount of your trip on facilities other than the expressway itself. This led us to understand that the expressway itself really is serving as a long on and off ramp for trips originating in and nearby Region Central. They would be trips on and off to the 33 and the 190. Same thing, 8% at the east end of the expressway travel all the way to the west end, 19% of the other way. So again, that suggests that it's functioning other than an end-to-end expressway, and it's not necessarily a work trip. So some of the context, how that affects the neighborhoods, mobility takeaways, less significant regional attention, and some of the parallel corridors are less studied. Ped, bike, other multimodal data and data analysis, largely absent from previous studies. Concept designs from the community initiative groups looked mostly at the corridor design and not how it integrates or connects with the neighborhoods. And inclusive analysis of the corridor as a local neighborhood area and regional divider across all modes was never previously prepared or reviewed, but there's wide-ranging acknowledgement of it. Coming out of all that, we created 3 what we call lenses. So this is how we're looking at creating alternatives One is effective local and regional mobility. 2, replenishing parks, parkways, waterways, and places. And 3, inclusive development. Out of that, we created metrics to measure the impacts of different scenarios. And there were 4. One is full expressway removal, which would remove the expressway along its entire length and replace it with a shared use path. So no automobiles or vehicles on there, largely bike and ped. Looking then at different ways of connecting on either end. 2, a partial expressway removal. So still a at-grade boulevard for much of it, merged with a shared use path that it goes from Parkside basically to Lincoln. So that frees up land to reconnect areas of the park and provide park access. A third is an at-grade roadway. So it's regional access and at-grade character. So it replaces the expressway with an at-grade tree-lined boulevard, 1 or 2 lanes in each direction, and removes all the ramps, which frees up, again, much land for other uses, and provides more land for bike ped sidewalk facilities and some things. You can see an example where that was done in Rochester, Bronx, New York, other areas, so it's not new. And then we also sought to rethink the connections to 190 and the expressway on the other end. Status quo was the final one. So we looked at what if we kept the expressway as it is, did some safety improvements, and largely then some things like adaptive signal control, relocated some of the adjacent facilities, retained the expressway, and connected on either end. So those were the 4. From those 4, we've been using those and the lenses and metrics to understand how they work, how they provide, how they yield the benefits that we were looking for in those bigger lenses. And in all of them, we would include things like smarter mobility considerations, including micro-mobility program around the campuses, integration of on-demand microtransit, low-speed automated shuttle, possibly for the institutions and for access to the park system, a mobility hub at one of the transit stations. All these things we would then layer on top of a scenario that was developed. We use the analytics to understand how those scenarios perform in terms of the metrics, including things like we were able to measure, and these were the scores for each of the scenarios. For example, status quo, access to buff state by driving. So you can see the drive shed 4.7 square miles within 4 minutes versus for the at-grade roadway gives you 6.8 miles. So that gives an indication of how they each performed against a variety, and this is just a very thin slice of things we studied. Same thing, Buffalo State College by bike. Connectivity between neighborhoods. You saw that list of all the neighborhoods we looked at. So we did studies of take one neighborhood and then its accessibility to all other neighborhoods for each of the scenarios. So that gave us an indication on the ability to connect those neighborhoods and how it's impacted. You could see that there was a score for each of those scenarios on its ability to connect neighborhoods with mobility improvements. Finally, we talked about smarter mobility. Going forward, smart signals already in place in some places and working well. Autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, where would we put charging stations? Remote work is clearly a consideration. Mobility hubs with bike share, micro mobility, public transit, all those things we can then put in terms of ability to move people around into the corridor to supplement what we would do with traditional infrastructure. So what are the outcomes? So this is not a design, this is a design approach. And we were asked to come up with a consensus where most people would agree that this is the right approach. We would then feed that into the design process, which includes things like roadway alignment, where would it go, location, capacity, operations, connectivity improvements, where would you prioritize crossings, how many, parallel corridor improvements, and then local connections. And then finally, layer on the multimodal system recommendations in terms of bike, ped, transit, local street networks, shared mobility services. So we looked at overall considerations, benefit to region central populations, economic and equity opportunities created, and regional benefits, all tied to the goals that we were developing. So at the end of the day, and we're hoping to wrap this process up fairly soon and launch into implementation, we would complete this collaborative decision process, determine owners and resource commitments and needs, and build an action matrix. So there will be different owners of these different parts of the solution that need to work together. And we've done that in other places in the region. It's worked pretty well. Reconcile our existing project to the environmental process and funding. Establish a continuing mechanism that would meet regularly to ensure delivery of this project. Again, because there's a disaggregate coalition, if you will, of participants that have different parts of this solution. Then downstream, build a working group to integrate this project with stakeholder plans. So they would not necessarily have transportation solutions, but they have their own projects relevant to the colleges, the institutions, the environmental improvements that would be affected by the transportation changes. So we would look at how we would integrate them with deployment of these solutions. And again, along the way, so we now have established metrics. We would measure the results that were occurring against those metrics to make sure that we're getting the result that we wanted. And over the years, if we find that there are some opportunities to change and deploy different parts of the solution to strengthen our results, we can then go do that. So that is briefly what we're planning on doing. And it's not only planning, but it's well underway and nearing completion. So we are available then to entertain discussion, questions, and
Hal, that's just what we're going to do. Hal, thanks for the great presentation. Along with Mike, I will invite everybody to submit questions. We've can go a little bit over our 1 o'clock timeline here and entertain as many as possible. So submit those, please. And while you're doing that, let me get it started. 2 observations. I like the idea that you're seemingly talking the corridor, which includes the Humboldt Park Expressway and the Scajaquada. And my first thought is, ever since that tragic accident that happened near the Buffalo Zoo, near Parkside, there's been a reduction in speed limit. So you really don't have an expressway in the Scajaquada anymore. You've got a parkway. And
right.
That terminology really would go a long way, perhaps, to holding whatever emerges as the best way to handle it. It is, as you point out, part of the Olmsted Park system. That really is our legacy here in Buffalo, that being the first park system, world class, basically. How do we get transportation needs met at every level, but really keep remembering that it is a park system designed for people? Carriages back in the day, but not an expressway to just zip through. And all your studies seem to reinforce that. What's your thoughts on that as we start to accumulate these questions?
Correct. And that was number 2, how to replenish parks, parkways, waterways. So we looked at the different scenarios that we showed. And then if you wanted to strengthen a scenario, we looked for places that, for example, when you took out the ramps and replaced those with intersections, suddenly you yielded more space that could be utilized to, replenish the park system, provide more access, to the creek, and depend on alignment and configuration. So that would then strengthen the preferred scenario, giving you better scores and helping us get to where we wanted to be.
And is there a sense of a process that maybe you do this in phases, because many of those items would be major reconfigurations? But I'm thinking, if you think park and parkway, then your 2-lane existing roads serve a purpose. If you see 1 lane for cars and 1 lane for parking, people then could park and walk out and go into the park system. Whoops.
It would come out in the design process.
Okay.
The final scenario will then provide input to that. So then if we know what types of transportation solutions will provide, again, sufficient mobility to get us where we need to be, but then also yield improvements to parks, because we wanted to generate some improvements. Look at things like, how could we change the configuration slightly to get Hoyt Lake back? How could we then provide better access to Scajaquada Creek? provide Black Rock with their harborfront that they've been hungry for, and provide some mobility on the Black Rock Riverside neighborhood that would then help activate those currently vacant parcels that are being cleaned up, and with better access could generate new development and new jobs for people in and around the corridor.
I like it. All right, Caitlin, what do we got for questions?
Yeah, so the first question we have is, what's the timeline on moving forward with any substantial physical plans?
Our timeline now is to finish this initial process, which we expect to do within the coming few months, input that then to the design process. We need to come out of here with a cost estimate. We need to come out of here with an analysis of traffic impacts and assure us that everything we do is going to be appropriate so people can get where they need to be, and then input that into the design process. Now, traditionally, you would think, and it always been in the past, that NISDOT was the sole implementer, but there's improvements in here that are not on NISDOT's plate. So part of our coordination is to bring together all the parties and then look at how they can get funded, implemented, and then how they would then actually deploy resources to implement those projects in concert with any changes on the 198.
Yeah, there was a follow-up to that, that they said you spoke of parallel transportation changes. Any short-term, middle, or long-term plans for Forest Avenue?
That's one of the things we're looking at now, actually, because Forest continues to undergo transformation. So we're looking at how does that fit into the whole collection, if you will, of implementation options. So we're getting close to that. So what other facilities parallel to that would be impacted or could help us be part of the solution that would provide better mobility? So we're getting close to looking at the specific, again, parallel and connecting arterials. How would they be configured, and what would be the best approach to bringing them into the process and finding some constructive solutions that help us in terms of overall mobility, not just cars, but also then bikes, peds, and other amenities.
As for now, I don't have any further questions in my chat.
Thank you, Caitlin. If any come in, holler. Mike, you had mentioned a timeline when we spoke a few months back in setting this up of maybe the end of the year. Does that still, that you have to hear from Albany in terms of next steps? At least that's what I understood. What's the timetable right in front of us then?
I'll let Hal speak to the next steps.
Yep, we're nearing the next steps, which are, we had those 4 scenarios. So now we're going through the metrics, see how everything scores against what I showed you on the screens, and picking the best parts of each and making this combined scenario. We would then go out to and right now we've been going out extensively every day to stakeholders that have a part of this process and show them some options, get their feedback and incorporate that into a preferred scenario, take it out to the public probably in another 30 to 60 days. From that, we'll incorporate that into our final recommendations and bring that forward in terms of what could that look like? What's the design approach? What is the cost? How does it impact traffic? And then how do we move that forward into the process?
In many ways, it seems to me like you're incorporating the Humboldt project, at least in the back of your mind, if not specifically for Scajaquada, to see it holistically. And so much of the feedback that seems to be going on is to say, wait a minute, what does the community need? Development, certainly on the east side. How do you help people go north-south, maybe on Jefferson, perhaps on Fillmore, things of that sort that you can go ahead and incorporate that thought process into what happens next on both expressways. Does that sound like a correct observation?
Right, and the Cover the Kensington project is moving ahead on its own with their environmental review process. And if you went to the scoping meetings, you can see what they've been working on. They opened their project office this week, so you can go over and see what they're working on and talk to them. We're not combining these in any sense because they need to move ahead and get theirs completed within their existing process. What we did was say, we will configure our eastern end. So whatever comes out of that process, we're able to incorporate it, integrate it into what we're talking about on Scajaquada.
Regardless what they do, cover it, fill it in, leave it the same, etc. That would be your goal.
Yep.
So I do have a couple other questions if there's time permitting for it.
Go ahead.
Out of the 4 plans, is one becoming most obvious as the best choice?
We've been evaluating the scores. So now what we're doing is looking at how do we mix and match to get the strongest overall score. So there's a lot of input from the public as we move those around. And like I say, we've been doing that every day now for weeks, as well as, again, doing the technical analytical work and looking at it in terms of how can you strengthen one versus another. So we're not done with that yet, but we're getting close.
Okay.
I don't want to presuppose an answer until we have a chance to really hear from everybody.
And then the second question is, please discuss possible bicycle lanes included in the project.
Right, under the different scenarios, and there was 4, they have different levels of bicycle connectivity. Some of them include, refurbishing the existing routes and trails. Some talk about establishment of new ones. So, and also one of the important components to think about that is bike trails are not necessarily just recreational, but also we're looking at the extent to which they can be an important component of jobs access to retail, commute, again, to jobs and services. Many parts of Region Central don't have access to vehicles. So the ability to strengthen that with a walk trip, a bike trip, other ways will clearly help people. So it's important to think about not only trails as a recreational opportunity, but how do we then use those to, again, access people to jobs. And I hear that from the business community all the time, getting people to work, as well as being able to walk. And it's not just people without cars, but it'd be nice if you live there to be able to just like walk to shopping, groceries, and not have to drive everywhere.
I think I'm going to share one more, but it's, where are the 4 options available to view to the public, and can we still provide feedback?
Yes, still can. And I believe they are at our website, GBNRTC.org/Region Central. If you go there and they're not up, I will make sure they're up this week.
That's a great place to end it, Caitlin, because this information is on your website. GBNRTC has a wonderful website filled with information, and the beauty of this project, it inspired a great deal of conversation, I'm sure, from the community to you folks, and you seem to be doing a darn good job of listening. Everybody will have different opinions, but all they ask are for people to hear them out, and that seems to be going on. So this program is basically part of that process. And now the library has something that folks can also check on fairly concisely here. And my appreciation to both of you, Mike, Hal, for giving a very concise way of looking at a very massive thought process here as it deals with not just transportation, but the community at large to improve it, to leave it better than we found it. Let's put it that way in our generation.
For decades to come. It's really
for
important.
decades to come. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's perfect. So thank you both, fellas, for a great presentation. And folks, thank you for joining us today. We'll be back here on Zoom Tuesday, November 29th, after Thanksgiving, as we hear from Dr. Gerald Mead Jr., who's an art collector with part of his collection currently on display at the Castellani Art Museum. So we won't be here next Tuesday. So on behalf of the support staff at the library, we are wishing you and your families a great Thanksgiving holiday. I'm personally grateful for them at the library, the staff there that helps create this program on a weekly basis now. And folks, to you, our subscribers, listeners, and viewers, thank you. Have a great Thanksgiving. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and good day.
Thank you.